Would Michael Schumacher have won the 2003 F1 Championship without the late intervention of a rule change forced through by Ferrari for the final few races of the season? We're going to discuss that in great detail and much, much more from the 2003 Italian Grand Prix episode of Bring Back V10s. Welcome to the first Bring Back V10s debrief of season 12. For those of you who haven't seen or heard one of these before, this is a special bonus show where I take questions from the race members on Patreon about episodes of Bring Back V10s shortly after they've been released. We launched it in our last season, in season 11, and it was much more popular than we expected. So it's back for season 12, and we're going to give away small chunks of it on YouTube as well. So hello to anyone watching on YouTube. If you'd like to see the full show, check a pinned comment or a link in the description to come and have a look. As we learned during season 11 of doing these debriefs for the first time, there's always too many questions. Let's see how many we can get through in the time that we've got today. And we're going to start strong. We're going straight in with the big stuff. Ian Rigsby says, would Michael Schumacher be 2003 world champion if the tyre rule change didn't come in? And Liam Scully says, how do you think the 2003 world championship would have played out if the tyre rule change wasn't brought in? Obviously, most of you will know this story inside out. There was a change to the way tyre tread width was measured, which Michelin had been kind of exploiting the fact that the tyre tread width was measured before the race but not after it. Bridgestone then passed on to Ferrari that they felt that the Michelin tread width was expanding just a little bit at the edges to give them a bigger contact patch, and that Ferrari then fought that hard with the FIA and got an instant rule change between the Hungarian and Italian Grand Prix. Before I did the research for this episode, as a fan back then, I'd always been of the opinion that this rule change did sway the championship fight back in favour of Ferrari, Michael Schumacher, therefore Bridgestone. Having done so much research for this episode and then discussed it in great depth in our episode with Ed Straw and Ted Kravitz. It was great to have Ted as a special guest on the show. The more I've looked into it, the more I've revisited from the races, those final three races of 2003 that were supposedly affected by this, Monza, Indianapolis, Suzuka, I've actually come to the conclusion I don't think it made a difference, and it's for different reasons. But with Monza, the expectation was, even if there wasn't a rule change, Ferrari weren't expected, or Bridgestone weren't expected to struggle there, because they had a narrower tyre. Michelin and Bridgestone went about their tyres in a very different way. Part of the benefit of the slightly narrower Bridgestone was that it was less drag. The wheels are the draggiest part of an F1 car, because they're just in the way, in the airstream. So the narrower Bridgestone versus a Michelin was likely to be of a benefit for Monza anyway. So even before the talk of the rule change blew up, there was an expectation that despite the difficult summer Ferrari had had, which we'll discuss in more detail later, they were going to be okay at Monza anyway. So I think Schumacher would have been fine there, and I don't think the contact patch, the slightly smaller contact patch, made a huge difference at Monza. And you could tell from looking at the reaction of people like Juan Pablo Montoya, I got the impression he sort of expected to finish second to Schumacher there and wasn't really expecting the tyre to make a huge difference. One thing where it did have an impact for Monza was that they had this huge pre-Italian Grand Prix test. All the teams are there testing for days and days and days. All the Michelin teams could do, so Ferrari's main rivals, Williams and McLaren, most prominently, was focus on testing these new tyres. So maybe the fine margins that we're talking about, particularly between Schumacher and Montoya, the difference might actually have been that it disrupted Williams' preparation in that test, and it distracted them from getting the absolute maximum out of the car. And this was really a track position is king kind of race. So if Montoya could have had a slightly better setup, could have just out-qualified Michael Schumacher. There was talk in the research and in the episode that, you know, maybe Montoya made a tiny mistake on his qualifying lap that cost him pole position. Maybe that time could have been in car setup as well if they just spent the test not having to worry about these tyres. But then if you look at the races that followed, Indianapolis is a kind of a drizzly, rain-affected race. I don't think they never spent long enough on slicks in the dry for us to be able to say, the Michelin teams have been really hurt here. In fact, when it did rain for a bit and they were on slicks, the Michelin teams and their drivers still had the advantage they always did in those conditions. And then a race you could say was perhaps swung by the Bridgestone Intermediate, which wasn't affected by this rule change. And you have to assume that all the other parts of that race, so Montoya is still going to get his penalty that rules him out of contention as well. Montoya is out of the running by the time you get to Japan, but he breaks down while in the lead. So, he was still going well there. So it doesn't look like they were affected by that, really. And Michael Schumacher had a terrible Japanese Grand Prix in the race that he sealed the championship. Rubens Barrichello obviously got the job done at the front, beating Kimi Raikkonen. From what people were saying, and it was really interesting seeing how everybody was mapping out those final races, even before the tyre ruling came, there was a feeling that Ferrari were going to be a lot better at those races than they would have been otherwise. A lot of that is temperature related. There's lots of questions about 2003's hot European summer that we'll come to a bit later on. So yeah, it's been quite good doing this episode, doing all the research. I love when my fan theories from back when I was a fan, which I was for most of the V10 era, I got a job towards the end of it, working in motorsport. I love when my own theories and my own logic is tested by going back and looking at in huge detail, and also just looking at it dispassionately as well. That was a lot harder for me to do when I was a teenage fan of the sport, but now I can just kind of assess the facts and a bit of the opinion that was going around at the time and what people said, and kind of look at it with a more balanced eye. So yeah, I have changed my mind on this as a result of doing the research for this program. So I guess we we all continuously learn, don't we? So to those of you watching on YouTube, I hope you've enjoyed this little preview. There's lots more to come in this episode. There'll be a full episode on Patreon. Come and check it out. And if you really like it, then of course, if you sign up, you'll be able to take part in future. So you can listen to an episode and bring back V10s. Look out for us doing a shout out for questions, and you can get involved. You can steer this conversation. But thanks very much for checking this out, and I hope to see you again very soon.